My name is Oleg Karmashev, and this is my confession. On August 25, 2013 in the nightclub Fire, I met a charming girl. She introduced herself as Eve. I thought I was pretty damn lucky that she liked fat guys. She was a striking figure, with a well-proportioned body that looked as if it had been whittled by a craftsman, with a full bust and wide hips, like a Greek goddess. We danced with her all night. Of course, it will seem stupid to many, but I fell head over heels in love with this girl from the first minute. There was something gypsy about her, something so damned alluring. Naturally, after the dance, we went to my place. To tell you the truth, it was the best sex of my life. It was only during my orgasm that something seemed strange to me, but I didn't pay attention to it then. Her face. It was suddenly wrinkled and old. I screamed, but a moment later I was again confronted by a stunningly beautiful girl. I calmed down, putting it all down to the deceptive moonlight. The moon that day was white and full, like a dead man's eye. The next morning, Eve disappeared, though she left a note saying, "Last night was amazing. We could do it again sometime. Phone number, wear it with love." As I replaced the note, I suddenly noticed a small bracelet that I hadn't noticed before. Leather, black, with some strange signs and symbols carved directly into the skin. So this is what I should wear with love, I thought. And I wore it. I wore it without having to call the number myself. She found me the next day. I was walking after high school and saw her. She looked stunning in a black dress and black stockings. She smiled at me and asked, "Are you wearing my bracelet?" "Of course, Eve. It looks pretty good with my suit," I said, and kissed her. She allowed it to be done, but it seemed to me rather reluctantly. She was worried about something, and she was moving her hands impatiently, like an addict in need of a fix. "I have to tell you something, and you have to help me," she said, and pulled a crumpled newspaper sheet from her pocket. I was surprised at this turn of events, but I picked it up and began to read it. They were crime reports from August 10 in the area of Zolotovka, on Krylova Street, 67, there was a brutal rape followed by murder. The perpetrator has not been found. On August 13, a family of 4 people was shot with a double-barreled shotgun on Olovnaya Street, 13. The perpetrator has not been found. I read it and looked at Eve. Her eyes were burning with a strange fire that I couldn't understand, and I could feel the silent rage radiating from her, and I couldn't understand the reason for it. "What's wrong with you?" I asked. "I know murderers," she said simply, her eyes still flashing. I hadn't expected that. She really started scaring me. I asked, but she touched my arm gently about the wristband and sang sweetly, "Don't worry, honey. Everything will be fine, just come with me." And then something happened that I hadn't expected. I simply followed her, saying nothing, not saying anything or making any objections, even if there were any. It was as if my will had been turned off, and I simply did as I was told. Not only that, my consciousness also began to shut down. I woke up next to the mutilated corpse of a man in an apartment I didn't recognize. I was covered in blood. Eva stood on the sidelines, arms crossed on his chest, and smiled. She was happy. I made her smile and be happy, so it didn't matter what I had to do to make her happy. I kind of smiled back at her, and she said, "He's a rapist and a murderer." "You've done a good job, Oleg," she said, referring to me by my name. Then she came to me and kissed me so passionately that I closed my eyes in pleasure. When I opened them, I was at home, on the couch. My mother was sitting next to me, watching something on Channel 1. I was sweating from the nightmare. I looked at the time, it was 6 o'clock in the evening. "Why are you so late today?" Usually at 1 o'clock already at the computer, and here already at 5 I showed up. "The girl finally appeared?" asked the mother. My heart sank. I couldn't remember anything except the terrible scenes I'd had in my dreams. But it couldn't really have happened, could it? "I don't know," I said, and when I felt my hand, I tasted wild fear in my mouth. She was wearing the same bracelet. I got up and went to the bathroom. My mother kept her worried eyes on me the whole time. If all this were true, then my shirt would be soaked with blood through and through, I thought. But my shirt was perfectly clean, and I didn't even have the usual round sweaty spots. That's what made me suspicious. I decided to take off my shirt. When it was done, I tossed it aside and looked in the mirror. The hair on my head prickled with horror. A sharp retching impulse bent me in half, and I emptied my stomach to the floor in seconds. My entire torso was covered in dried blood, and there wasn't a single patch of white skin on it. I opened the shower and got into the bath, still breathing hard and not believing what had happened. "A murderer," went through my head. "My life is over. Goner." And I began to cry like a child, sobbing and not thinking about anything. I was standing in the shower, blood dripping from me and turning the water a bright scarlet. And I have seen this collar go down the drain into the sewer, and perhaps later feed its bloody juices to beady-eyed black rats. This vision made me sick for the second time. My mother knocked on the door for a long time. I couldn't wake up from the shock. The best I could do was wash the blood off the body and wash it out in the bathtub. I did it automatically, without thinking. My mother continued to knock, speaking quickly and excitedly through the door. I finally opened the door and answered her questioning look. "I just got poisoned, right, Mom, except that I killed a man," my already half-crazed brain thought. Before the gag reflex turned my already empty stomach around again, I quickly went to bed. The next day I felt better, and I told myself that it was a mental block. There was no murder, I just smeared myself with jam, paint, ketchup, or whatever it was. Or gone mad. The latter option was the most appealing because it was the most illogical. After all, when you are mad, you can do anything, and everything is forgiven you. I spent all day trying to make myself mentally crazy, trying to think of something abnormal, but at the end of the day I gave up trying. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't. My brain was functioning normally. I couldn't even imagine pink elephants floating in the sky. As I was leaving the university, to my great horror, I saw Eve again. She was standing on the opposite side of the road, smiling as if nothing had happened and looking straight at me. When I saw her, I abruptly turned back to the university. He didn't just turn around, but raced back as fast as he could, pushing past the other kids as they came out. My friend Vanya Gorkin stopped me and asked, "Where are you going? Have you forgotten something?" I looked back, not listening. Eve wasn't there. My heart was pounding so hard that I thought Vanka must have heard it too. "No, nothing," I said as calmly as possible. "Could you walk me to the subway?" Vanka was surprised, but apparently my pale appearance made an impression on him, and he nodded. We walked in silence, and I kept looking around, terrified to see even a glimpse of the familiar black dress. A couple of times I even screamed, which really scared Vanka. I could see by his face that he was already regretting having let me out. When I was still a few meters from the subway, someone suddenly grabbed my arm from behind and pulled me away from my friend. I turned and was petrified. It was Eve, and she was smiling at me, but I could feel her anger consuming and burning everything in its path. "Where are you going, honey?" "We have a lot of things to do today," she said, and led me, as I had the first time, completely out of control, to one side. With a final effort, I turned my head in the direction of my friend. It was just like the first time. I couldn't control my movements. But I didn't lose consciousness now. We were in a basement somewhere, and two men were on their knees in front of me, crying. Real grown men, probably older than I was, were crying like newborn babies. All I could hear was my own deafening laughter, filling the basement with a thunderous sound. Eve stood to one side, grinning contemptuously. Then she nodded at me. No. The other me. With my other hand, I picked up a kitchen knife and stood behind the men. They kept crying and begging me to spare them. They offered me money, apartments, cars, anything, but I didn't say anything and slashed one of them from ear to ear. The second man screamed, and with a second swing, I stuck the knife right in his ear. Two bodies thudded to the concrete floor like sacks of potatoes. I turned around to pet Eve, because everything I did was for her. When I saw what was standing in Eve's place, the inner, real self, was horrified. It was a black, shriveled creature with large, bottomless black eyes, and on its head it had small red horns the color of blood, and it stretched out its claws towards me like a vulture's. The other one didn't seem to notice the substitution and went to hug the creature. I was terrified to see it up close, and it was even more terrifying at the distance of my hand. The creature's skin was charred, as if it had been roasted in the pit from which it had no doubt come. It looked me in the eye and said in a voice as rough as a blacksmith's, "Thank you." Then abruptly it tore the bracelet from my arm and disappeared my eyes into and closed them. Then I opened it again, but the picture didn't change. This time I wasn't at home. I fell exhausted on the floor next to the corpses and lay there until the police arrived. They say that when they found me, I was lying in a pool of someone else's blood, looking in front of me with a glass and seeing eye and repeating everything, "It will come back. It won't leave me, it won't leave me. It's not fair. But life in general is unfair." During the interrogations, I was silent all the time. What could I say? Then I was sent for a forensic psychiatric examination, and I had no doubt that I would be found sane. As much as I wanted to, the only thing that calmed me down was that my victims didn't get much sympathy either. It turned out that the first victim was an ex-con who had served 15 years for a double rape. The other two are robbers and repeat offenders who were put on an international wanted list, but no one could find them. They constantly changed their place of residence. And do you know what I did? I didn't just find them outside the city on an abandoned military training ground. I somehow climbed to a height of 4 meters, knocked out the ventilation grate and crawled 6 meters down the pipe. Then I jumped out of nowhere and... Now I've told you everything, and it's up to you to believe me or not. I'll go to jail anyway. The lawyer throws up his hands and says they'll give you at least 20 years for special cruelty, but he doesn't seem to have much sympathy for me. He looks at me with disgust, as if I'm a dead rat, and I understand him. As soon as I get the chance, I'll kill myself. I'm not afraid of pain or death, and I don't even claim heaven, as you can see. Yesterday, in front of a crying mother, he pretended to be crazy, so as not to upset her, let her think that her son is crazy. When I think about what happened, I realize that I was a weapon. But in whose hands? An angel? A demon? Who is Eve, and how many such Eves roam the earth, cleaning it from murderers, rapists, pedophiles and other degenerates of the human race? And how many innocent victims of temporary brain fog? Sometimes I think that there are people who are so disgusting that even the devil can't accept their existence, and then she comes in. Eve,